Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Alright, let's dive into one of the most unsettling, mind-bending questions in the entire Warhammer 40k universe. Is there something within the warp itself that dares to hunt the very gods it spawned? It's a terrifying concept, isn't it? The thought that even the monstrous deities of chaos, entities like Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, might not be as untouchable as they seem. After all, the warp is a place of madness and contradiction. A realm where nothing is ever truly safe or stable, not even the gods themselves. For a long time, we've seen these beings as the apex predators of the immaterium, endlessly scheming, fighting, and devouring each other in a twisted, eternal dance of chaos. They thrive on the raw emotions and psychic echoes of the material universe, feeding on the very souls of the living. But what if there were forces within this ever-shifting nightmare that sought to turn the tables? What if the very essence of the warp, the chaotic tides of unreality, could spawn creatures or phenomena powerful enough to threaten their creators? It's a chilling thought, one that forces us to rethink everything we know about chaos. Could it be that the gods, for all their power, are not invincible? That they too can be hunted, cornered, even devoured by the very currents that sustain them? Perhaps there is a dark, hidden truth to the immaterium, a secret that even the chaos gods fear to confront. The possibility that their dominion is not as absolute as they would like to believe. Let's see if we can piece together this disturbing puzzle, diving deep into the abyss of the warp to find out if there really are predators within this twisted realm, waiting for the right moment to strike against the gods themselves. Alright, if we want to truly understand whether something within the warp could ever hunt the gods themselves, we first need to grasp what the warp actually is. At its core, the warp isn't just a parallel dimension or a twisted reflection of reality. It's something far more primal, a vast, ever-churning sea of pure emotion, a realm where the collective hopes, fears, dreams, and nightmares of every living being in the galaxy blend into a chaotic, formless mass. It's a place where time loses all meaning, where cause and effect break down, and where the very fabric of existence can be twisted into impossible shapes. This raw, psychic energy doesn't just exist. It pulses, it flows, it storms through the immaterium like a living thing. It's both infinite and confined, a paradox made of pure thought and emotion. Every scream of terror, every whispered prayer, every moment of ecstasy or despair from the physical universe adds a drop to this endless ocean, fueling its ever-shifting tides. It's a place of contradiction, a realm where something as abstract as an idea can take form, where a fleeting thought can birth an entire world of torment, and where every sin, every secret desire, and every hidden fear has the potential to become a living nightmare. What makes the warp truly terrifying is its instability. It is, by its very nature, a place of extremes, a domain where order and structure are not just absent but violently rejected. It is a place that can never be tamed, where even the most powerful gods must struggle to impose their will upon its chaotic depths. And this, perhaps, is the first clue as to why the gods' chaos might not be as invulnerable as they seem. Because in a place where nothing is fixed, where reality itself can be twisted and rewritten with a single, all-consuming thought, even the mighty are at risk of being consumed. Some fan theories even suggest that the warp itself is a kind of living organism, an entity so vast and incomprehensible that it can only express itself through the shifting tides of madness that define its existence. In this view, the gods of chaos are less like rulers and more like parasites, feeding off the energies of a realm that they can never truly control. They may dominate parts of it, twist its currents to their will, and bend its raw power to their dark purposes. But they can never truly tame it. They are, in a sense, prisoners of their own domain, forever at the mercy of the very chaos they seek to master. And perhaps this is where the seeds of their downfall might lie. For if the warp is alive in some sense, if it has a will of its own, then who is to say it could not one day turn against its most powerful inhabitants? Perhaps the immaterium itself could become the ultimate predator, a devouring maw that consumes not just the dreams of mortals, but the very gods themselves. This idea that the warp might one day rebel against its own creators is a terrifying one. It suggests that the gods of chaos, for all their power, are merely temporary rulers in a realm that could one day rise up to cast them down. It's a possibility that haunts the darkest corners of Warhammer 40k lore, a whisper in the shadows of the Immaterium that reminds us that in the realm of pure chaos, nothing is ever truly certain, and even the mightiest can fall. The emergence of the Chaos Gods is one of the most unsettling chapters in the dark history of the Warp. These beings didn't just appear overnight, fully formed and dripping with malice. Now, they were born slowly, painfully, over eons, as the psychic energies of the galaxy coalesced into the monstrous, godlike entities we now know as Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh. Each of them is a manifestation of the raw, unfiltered emotions and desires of countless souls, a twisted reflection of the darkest aspects of sentient thought. Khorne, the blood god, was the first to awaken. His birth was a violent, explosive event, a psychic storm fueled by the countless acts of war and slaughter that had soaked the galaxy in blood long before humanity ever took to the stars. Every blade drawn, every war cry shouted, every life taken in rage and bloodlust added a spark to the growing inferno that would become Khorne. He is pure, undiluted wrath, a god who thrives on the chaos of battle and the primal urge to dominate through sheer force. Unlike the more cunning or deceitful entities that would follow, Khorne is direct, brutal, and utterly uncompromising. He cares nothing for subtlety or intrigue, only for the thrill of combat and the spilling of blood. Nurgle, on the other hand, rose not from rage, but from despair and decay. He is the embodiment of rot and entropy, the slow, inevitable decline that claims all things in time. But more than that, he is the god of resilience, of the stubborn refusal to give up in the face of decay and destruction. To Nurgle, disease is not merely a tool of suffering, but a grim reminder that life clings to existence, even in its darkest moments. He was born from the primal fear of death and the relentless struggle for survival, from the whispered fears of countless dying races and the hopelessness that seeps into the bones of those facing inevitable doom. Yet there's a twisted affection in Nurgle, a paternal warmth that stands in stark contrast to his hideous form. He loves his creations, cherishing each bloated, disease-ridden soul, as a father might cherish his children. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, is perhaps the most enigmatic of the Chaos Gods. He embodies change, evolution, and the never-ending pursuit of knowledge. His rise came from the ceaseless plots and schemes of countless minds, the desperate dreams of the powerless, and the ambitions of those who sought to reshape their destinies. Tzeentch feeds on the very concept of change, thriving on every political maneuver, every whispered conspiracy, and every desperate gamble for power. He is the master of manipulation, the god of lies and secrets, a being whose every move is calculated to further his unknowable plans. Unlike Khorne, who demands blood and fire, Tzeentch desires only chaos in the truest sense, a world forever in flux, forever uncertain. And then, last to awaken, there was Slaanesh, the youngest of the Chaos Gods, born in a single, catastrophic moment of unparalleled excess and unrestrained desire. Slaanesh came into being at the height of the Eldari Empire, when the Eldar, drunk on their own power and unshackled by any moral restraint, descended into a spiral of decadence and self-indulgence. Their psychic excesses tore a hole in reality itself, birthing a god of pure hedonistic pleasure and agonizing sensation. Slaanesh is a being of contrasts, at once beautiful and monstrous, a creature that embodies both the height of artistic expression and the depths of depravity. Unlike the other gods, who thrive on conflict and fear, Slaanesh is a creature of desire, a god who draws power from the very act of creation and destruction, from every whispered promise and every forbidden act. What sets these four apart from the countless lesser entities that haunt the Immaterium is not just their immense power, but their ability to impose their will upon the very fabric of the warp. They are not mere spirits or wandering echoes of emotion, but true gods, beings capable of reshaping reality itself through their sheer, unbridled force of will. They are the apex predators of the Immaterium, the dark lords of a realm where only the strongest survive. And yet, even they are not without their weaknesses. For all their power, they remain bound to the tides of the warp, their fates forever, tied to the ebb and flow of the emotional currents that gave them life. It's this paradox, this simultaneous power and vulnerability, that makes the Chaos Gods so fascinating and so terrifying. They are, in a sense, prisoners of their own nature, beings of pure emotion trapped in a realm that both sustains and threatens to consume them. And perhaps in this endless cycle of creation and destruction, there lies the key to their eventual downfall. The gods of chaos are not allies. Far from it. They are bitter rivals, locked in an endless, violent struggle for supremacy that defines the very nature of the warp itself. This isn't a conflict born from petty disagreements or minor slights, but a fundamental, existential clash between beings whose very essences are diametrically opposed. It's a war without end, a cosmic conflict that has raged since the moment the first of the Chaos Gods awoke to sentience. And it's one of the key reasons why the warp is such a chaotic, unpredictable place. Take Khorne, for example. The blood god embodies raw, unfiltered rage, the brutal, instinctual drive to dominate through sheer physical power. His domain is one of violence and martial prowess, where the strong crush the weak without mercy or hesitation. Khorne has no time for deception or cunning. He respects only raw strength and the simple, brutal honesty of combat. But this makes him an eternal enemy of Tzeentch, the changer of ways, whose entire existence is built on manipulation, deceit, and the ever-shifting currents of fate. To Khorne, Tzeentch is a coward, a schemer who hides behind lies and shadows, never facing his enemies directly, always twisting the rules of reality to his advantage. It's a fundamental clash of philosophies, one that ensures these two will never truly stand side by side. Then there's Nurgle, the Plague Father, who stands in stark contrast to both Khorne and Tzeentch. Nurgle represents the slow, inevitable decay of all things, the grim, unending cycle of death and rebirth. To him, there is no need for the ceaseless struggle of Khorne or the endless scheming of Tzeentch. All things rot, all things die, and in that final decay, there is a strange, twisted sort of peace. But this puts Nurgle at odds with Tzeentch as well. For where Tzeentch seeks constant change and disruption, Nurgle craves stability, a perpetual, unchanging state of decay. It's a conflict as old as the warp itself, a philosophical battle between chaos as transformation and chaos as stasis, with no possible resolution in sight. And then, of course, there's Slaanesh, the youngest of the Chaos Gods, whose very existence is an affront to the more primal, elemental forces of his siblings. Slaanesh embodies excess in all its forms, the insatiable hunger for sensation and experience, the pursuit of perfection that can never truly be satisfied. To Khorne, Slaanesh is a mockery of true strength, a weakling who hides behind beauty and pleasure, who seeks fulfillment in fleeting sensations rather than the purity of combat. To Nurgle, Slaanesh is a child, forever chasing the ephemeral, forever avoiding the harsh, unchanging reality of entropy and decay. Even Tzeentch finds Slaanesh distasteful, a creature of impulse and chaos without purpose, a being whose every whim undermines the careful plans and schemes he weaves through the immaterium. This ceaseless, brutal conflict between the Chaos Gods is not just a background detail in the lore of Warhammer 40k. It is, in many ways, the very heartbeat of the warp itself, the engine that drives its constant roiling chaos. Without this eternal struggle, the warp might well stagnate, becoming little more than a shadow of its true, terrifying self. It's this internal conflict that keeps the immaterium alive, a constantly shifting battlefield where the strong rise and fall, where alliances are as fleeting as the tides, and where the only true constant is the certainty of betrayal and bloodshed. Some fans even speculate that this eternal war might be the one thing that keeps the gods of chaos in check, preventing any one of them from rising to true, uncontested power. It's a twisted sort of balance, a cosmic dance where every victory is temporary, every triumph tinged with the promise of inevitable defeat. And perhaps, in this endless cycle of conflict, there lies a hidden truth about the nature of chaos itself. Where if the gods of chaos can never truly unite, if their very natures force them into perpetual conflict, then perhaps they are not as all-powerful as they seem. It's a chilling thought, one that suggests that the gods of chaos, for all their might and terror, are as much prisoners of their own nature as they are masters of the immaterium. And perhaps, just perhaps, it's this very conflict that might one day lead to their downfall, as the tides of the warp shift and change, as new powers rise from the depths to challenge their rule. The relationship between the Chaos Gods and the countless lesser entities that populate the warp is as complex and dangerous as the Immaterium itself. It's not just a simple hierarchy of power, with the gods at the top and the lesser demons groveling at their feet. No, it's more like a twisted, ever-shifting web of alliances, rivalries, and hidden agendas. A chaotic dance where even the smallest creature can, under the right circumstances, challenge the mightiest of the dark gods. Daemons are not mindless slaves. They are fragments of the gods' own power, shards of their twisted primal essence given form and purpose. They are, in a sense, living extensions of their creators, manifestations of the raw emotions and psychic echoes that feed their divine masters. But this doesn't mean they are entirely loyal. In fact, the nature of daemons is as fickle and treacherous as the gods themselves. They are driven by the same primal urges, the same burning desires for power and dominion, and this often leads them to act in ways that directly oppose their creators' interests. Take the bloodletters of Khorne, for example. These vicious, blade-wielding warriors are among the most iconic of all chaos daemons, creatures of pure rage and violence who exist only to spill blood and claim skulls for their master. They are the foot soldiers of the blood god, his shock troops in the endless war against the followers of other gods. But even they can be dangerous to their own kind. Bloodletters are known to fight each other as readily as they fight their enemies, driven by a primal need to prove their strength and claim the favor of their brutal god. This constant infighting, this ceaseless struggle for dominance, can weaken even the mightiest of Khorne's armies, leaving them vulnerable to attack from other, more cunning rivals. Then there are the plague bearers of Nurgle, the lumbering, disease-ridden foot soldiers of the Plague Father. Unlike the bloodletters, they are not driven by rage or hatred, but by a grim, unshakable sense of duty. They see themselves as Nurgle's chosen, his beloved children, each one a living symbol of decay and entropy. But this loyalty comes at a cost. Plague bearers are notorious for their stubbornness, their refusal to adapt to changing circumstances, and their near-total lack of subtlety. They march into battle with a slow, relentless determination, caring nothing for strategy or cunning, and this makes them vulnerable to more agile, unpredictable foes. And then there are the horrors of Tzeentch, creatures of pure change and chaos, constantly shifting and reforming as they twist through the Immaterium. Unlike the warriors of Khorne or the diseased soldiers of Nurgle, they are not bound by any fixed form or purpose. They are creatures of pure, undiluted magic, beings who exist only to spread chaos and disrupt the plans of their enemies. But this same unpredictability can make them a liability. They are as likely to turn on each other as they are to strike at their enemies, their ever-changing forms and mercurial natures making them as dangerous to their allies as to their foes. And of course, there are the Daemonettes of Slaanesh, the graceful, seductive warriors of the Prince of Pleasure. They are swift, deadly, and utterly merciless, creatures who live only to feel the thrill of battle and the ecstasy of the kill. But their loyalty is as fleeting as their moods, their every action driven by a constant, insatiable hunger for new sensations. They can turn on their allies in an instant, betraying those they once fought alongside, for the promise of a more satisfying kill or a more pleasurable experience. All of this makes the relationship between the Chaos Gods and their demonic servants a dangerous, unstable thing. The gods may be powerful, but they are also prisoners of their own natures, their every command twisted and interpreted through the warped minds of their creations. And this, perhaps, is one of the greatest weaknesses of the Chaos Gods. For all their power, they are surrounded by creatures who, in their own twisted way, crave the same thing they do: power, domination, and the chance to stand above all others, even their creators. It's a twisted, violent dance, a constant struggle for dominance that mirrors the eternal war between the gods themselves. And perhaps, in this chaotic web of betrayal and bloodshed, there lies the first hint of the Chaos Gods' eventual downfall. A reminder that even the mightiest beings in the Immaterium are never truly safe from the monsters they have created. While the Chaos Gods dominate the Immaterium, bending its raw, seething energies to their will, it would be a mistake to think they have absolute control over everything within it. The warp is, by its very nature, a realm of chaos and unpredictability, a place where even the most powerful beings can find themselves at the mercy of forces they cannot fully comprehend. It's a place of infinite potential, where strange, unpredictable phenomena can arise without warning, born from the ever-changing tides of emotion and thought that swirl through its depths. One of the most intriguing possibilities is the existence of entities within the warp that are not beholden to any of the four great powers. These beings, if they exist, would be free from the direct influence of Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, or Slaanesh, acting according to their own strange, unknowable motives. They might not even recognize the gods as their masters, existing in a state of pure, unbound chaos, untouched by the hierarchies that define much of the Immaterium. Some fans speculate that the warp itself, as a living, breathing entity, might give rise to such forces from time to time. Perhaps the very act of feeding on the thoughts and emotions of countless mortal beings creates unpredictable side effects, echoes of power that coalesce into new, independent entities. These could be the spiritual equivalent of rogue waves in an already storm-tossed sea, sudden, violent eruptions of psychic energy that take on a life of their own, ignoring the commands of the Chaos Gods and carving their own paths through the Immaterium. There are even whispers of beings that might predate the Chaos Gods themselves, forgotten entities from a time before the Immaterium became the twisted, war-torn realm it is today. Some have speculated that the first stirrings of consciousness in the warp might have given rise to ancient, primal entities, beings that have long since faded into the shadows, but whose remnants might still linger in the darkest corners of the warp, waiting for their moment to rise again. These forgotten gods, if they exist, would have no allegiance to the current rulers of the warp, and might even view them as usurpers, pretenders to a throne they themselves once held. There are also the strange, twisted beings known as enslavers, creatures that seem to operate outside the usual hierarchy of the warp. These horrifying parasites are not true daemons, but rather entities that feed on the psychic energy of sentient minds, using their hosts as gateways into the material realm. They have no loyalty to the Chaos Gods, and in fact their very presence is a direct threat to the stability of the warp, as they consume the same psychic energies that the gods rely on to maintain their power. Some have even suggested that the enslavers might be a kind of natural predator within the Immaterium, a force that arose to counterbalance the unchecked growth of the Chaos Gods and their demonic legions. And then there are the strange, whispering echoes that some psychers claim to have heard while lost in the depths of the warp. Voices that seem to come from nowhere and speak in tongues no living being should understand. These whispers are often dismissed as mere hallucinations, the ravings of minds broken by the strain of navigating the Immaterium. But what if they are something more? What if they are the echoes of forgotten gods, the dying breaths of beings that once ruled the warp, or the first stirrings of new powers struggling to be born in the chaotic depths? All of this paints a picture of the warp as a place far more complex and dangerous than even the most twisted of mortal minds can fully comprehend. It is a realm where the mighty can fall, where the gods themselves might one day find themselves hunted by the very forces they have sought to control for so long. And perhaps, in the end, it is this potential for the unexpected, this lurking chaos within chaos, that poses the greatest threat to the four great powers of the Immaterium. It's a chilling thought, one that forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about the warp and the beings that dwell within it. Or if the Immaterium can spawn such independent, unpredictable forces, then perhaps the reign of the Chaos Gods is not as eternal as it seems. And perhaps one day, their own creations will rise up to challenge them for control of the twisted, ever-changing realm they call home. The idea that the four major Chaos Gods are the only true powers within the warp is, at best, a comforting illusion. The truth is likely far darker, far stranger, and far more unsettling. If we consider the Immaterium as a living, ever-changing entity, then it's entirely possible that the gods we know today are merely the latest in a long line of powerful beings that have risen and fallen within its depths. The warp is ancient, perhaps as old as the universe itself, and it's hard to believe that the four great powers we know today were the first to lay claim to its chaotic heart. Some theories suggest that before Khorne first tasted the psychic echoes of war, before Nurgle drew his first diseased breath, before Tzeentch twisted his first strand of fate, and before Slaanesh screamed into existence with the fall of the Eldar, there were older, stranger gods that ruled the warp. These beings, if they ever existed, have long since been forgotten, their names lost to the madness of the Immaterium, and their forms scattered like dust on the psychic winds. But what if they still exist in some form, waiting for their moment to rise again? One such theory speaks of the so-called Forgotten Ones, a race of primal, ancient beings who once dominated the warp, their powers drawn not from the raw emotions of mortal minds, but from the very fabric of reality itself. These entities would have been far more alien than the chaos gods we know today, beings of pure, unfiltered potential, with forms and desires as unknowable as the Immaterium itself. Perhaps they were beings of pure entropy, creatures that thrived on the slow, inevitable decay of all things. Or maybe they were creatures of pure order, whose very existence was anathema to the chaotic tides of the warp. Some even speculate that these forgotten gods might have been the first beings to emerge from the Immaterium, the first sparks of awareness in a realm that had known only chaos and darkness for countless eons. If that's true, then it's possible that they still linger in the dark corners of the warp. Their power greatly diminished, but not entirely extinguished, waiting for the right moment to reclaim their lost thrones. There are also whispers of beings known as the Eldritch Lords, entities so old and so powerful that even the Chaos Gods fear to speak their names. These beings, if they exist, would be true horrors, creatures born from the deepest, most primal fears of sentient minds. Beings whose very thoughts could shatter reality, and whose whispers could drive entire civilizations to madness. Some even suggest that these Eldritch Lords might have once been the true masters of the warp before the rise of the four great powers, and that they were cast down by their own creations in a betrayal so profound that its echoes still reverberate through the Immaterium to this day. And then, of course, there are the mysterious, shadowy entities that some psychers claim to have glimpsed in their nightmares. Strange, flickering forms that move through the warp like phantoms, whispering in tongues no living being should understand. These beings are said to be older than the gods, older even than the stars themselves, creatures of pure, unending madness that exist only to devour the minds of the living and feed on the psychic echoes of their terror. What if these forgotten entities, these primal gods of an earlier age, are merely sleeping, biding their time until the day they can rise again to challenge the dominion of the four great powers? What if the gods we know today are merely the latest in a long line of usurpers, the newest rulers of a realm that has known countless masters over the aeons? It's a terrifying thought, one that forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about the nature of the warp and the beings that dwell within it. And perhaps, in the end, it's this lurking, ancient darkness that poses the greatest threat to the current rulers of the Immaterium. For if the warp truly is a place of infinite potential, a realm where forgotten gods can slumber for millennia, only to awaken when the stars align, then the reign of the Chaos Gods may be far more fragile than it seems. The idea that the four great Chaos Gods are the only true powers within the warp is a comforting lie. A convenient illusion that lets us imagine the Immaterium as something we can at least begin to comprehend. But the truth is likely far more terrifying. The warp is ancient, perhaps as old as the universe itself. A realm born from the first flickers of consciousness, from the primal fears and raw emotions of the earliest sentient beings. It stands to reason that before the rise of Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, there may have been other, older entities that once ruled the Immaterium, beings whose names have been forgotten or deliberately erased from the annals of reality. Some fans have speculated about the existence of these forgotten entities for years, whispering of ancient, primal gods who once held dominion over the warp before the rise of the current powers. These beings, if they ever existed, would have been truly alien, their forms and desires far removed from anything a mortal mind could comprehend. Perhaps they were born from the first flickers of sentient thought, from the raw, unfiltered terror of creatures struggling to understand their place in a vast, indifferent universe. Or perhaps they were born from the first dreams, the first whispers of hope and fear that echoed through the immaterium when the first stars began to burn. One such theory speaks of the so-called primordial ones, a race of ancient, forgotten gods whose power was drawn not from the raw emotions of mortal beings, but from the very fabric of reality itself. These entities might have been born from the first stirrings of entropy, from the slow, inevitable decay of matter and energy, or perhaps from the first whispers of time and causality that rippled through the newborn universe. If they existed, they would have been creatures of pure, unfiltered potential, beings of unimaginable power whose every thought could reshape the very nature of existence. Some even speculate that these primordial gods might still linger in the darkest corners of the warp, their power greatly diminished but not entirely extinguished, waiting for the right moment to rise again and reclaim their lost thrones. Perhaps they are the whispers in the dark that drive lesser demons to madness, the strange, flickering forms that some psychers claim to have glimpsed in their nightmares, beings that move through the warp like ghosts, speaking in tongues no living creature should understand. Others believe that these forgotten entities might have been the true masters of the warp before the rise of the current chaos gods, that they were cast down in a betrayal so profound that its echoes still reverberate through the immaterium to this day. Some even go so far as to suggest that the very existence of the current chaos gods is an affront to these ancient powers, that they are usurpers, pretenders to a throne that rightfully belongs to far older, far darker beings. There are also stories of beings known as the Eldritch Lords, creatures so old and so powerful that even the chaos gods fear to speak their names. These beings, if they exist, would be true horrors. Entities born from the deepest, most primal fears of sentient minds, beings whose very thoughts could shatter reality and whose whispers could drive entire civilizations to madness. Some have suggested that these Eldritch Lords might still exist in the deepest, most forgotten corners of the warp, their power diminished, but not entirely broken, waiting for the day they can rise again to challenge the dominion of the four great powers. And then there are the strange, whispering echoes that some psychers claim to have heard while lost in the depths of the warp. Voices that seem to come from nowhere and speak in tongues no living being should understand. These whispers are often dismissed as mere hallucinations, the ravings of minds broken by the strain of navigating the immaterium. But what if they are something more? What if they are the echoes of forgotten gods, the dying breaths of beings that once ruled the warp, or the first stirrings of new powers struggling to be born in the chaotic depths? If these theories are true, if there truly are forgotten gods slumbering in the depths of the immaterium, then the reign of the chaos gods may be far more fragile than it seems. For if the warp truly is a place of infinite potential, a realm where forgotten gods can slumber for millennia, only to awaken when the stars align, then the four great powers may one day find themselves challenged by forces far older and far more terrifying than they could ever imagine. The warp is a place of constant change and chaos, a realm where the normal rules of physics and reality simply don't apply. It's a place where thoughts can become flesh, where emotions can take on physical form, and where the line between the real and the unreal blurs into nothingness. But what if some of the entities within the warp don't fit neatly into the hierarchies established by the four great chaos gods? What if there are forces, creatures, or phenomena that exist outside their control, acting according to their own mysterious and often unknowable purposes? One of the most intriguing examples of this is the concept of warp anomalies, strange, unpredictable phenomena that can appear without warning and vanish just as quickly, leaving only madness and devastation in their wake. These anomalies are not true daemons, nor are they the direct creations of the chaos gods. They are, in a sense, the wild cards of the immaterium, rogue elements that refuse to play by the same twisted rules that govern the rest of the warp. Some of these anomalies seem to be little more than random bursts of psychic energy, violent storms of raw emotion that tear through the immaterium like spiritual hurricanes, shredding lesser daemons and warping reality itself as they pass. Others, however, seem to possess a strange kind of awareness, a primitive, almost instinctual intelligence that allows them to act with purpose and intent. These are the anomalies that truly terrify the denizens of the warp, for they represent a force that even the gods themselves cannot fully control or understand. One such phenomenon is the infamous Empyrean maelstroms, vast, swirling vortexes of psychic energy that can appear seemingly out of nowhere, devouring everything in their path. These maelstroms are often described as living storms, sentient whirlwinds of rage and despair that tear through the warp with the force of a supernova, consuming daemons, spirits, and even lesser gods without discrimination. Some believe these maelstroms are the psychic echoes of long-forgotten wars, the screams of dying gods and the final, desperate thoughts of entire civilizations given form and purpose. Others suggest that they might be something far older and far more dangerous, a primal force of destruction that predates even the birth of the chaos gods themselves. There are also the so-called word beasts, strange half-formed creatures that seem to exist in a state of constant flux, their bodies twisting and warping with every passing moment as if they are trapped in a perpetual state of becoming. Unlike true daemons, these creatures are not bound to any one form or purpose, and their motives, if they can even be said to have motives, are completely alien. Some scholars have suggested that these creatures might be the spiritual equivalents of rogue genetic mutations, random, unpredictable glitches in the fabric of the warp that have taken on a life of their own. Others believe that they might be the remnants of forgotten gods, shattered echoes of ancient, primal entities that have long since been driven mad by their own isolation. Then there are the whispering shadows, strange, incorporeal entities that flit through the darkest corners of the warp, their forms as insubstantial as smoke and their voices like the distant echoes of forgotten nightmares. These beings are said to be the remnants of souls that have become unmoored from the currents of the immaterium, fragments of broken minds and shattered dreams that have somehow taken on a kind of twisted, parasitic life. They are known to feed on the fear and despair of other creatures, latching onto their victims like spiritual leeches and draining them of their will to live. What makes these anomalies truly terrifying is their unpredictability. They do not follow the same rules as the demons and lesser spirits of the warp. They are not bound by the same laws of dominance and submission that govern the relationships between the chaos gods and their servants. They are, in a sense, truly free, existing outside the chains of hierarchy and control that define so much of the immaterium. And perhaps, in the end, it is this very freedom that makes them such a threat to the four great powers. For in a realm where even the most powerful gods are bound by their own nature, where every action is driven by the primal, unchanging essence that defines them, these rogue elements represent a force of true chaos, a wild card that could one day rise up to challenge the very order of the immaterium itself. The idea that the gods of chaos might one day destroy themselves is a chilling one, but it's not as far-fetched as it might seem. In fact, when you look at the nature of these beings, their endless hunger for power, and the brutal, unending wars they wage against each other, it becomes clear that their self-destruction is not just a possibility, but perhaps an inevitability. Chaos, by its very nature, is a force of constant conflict. It thrives on struggle, feeds on the clashing of wills, and draws strength from the endless cycle of destruction and rebirth. But this same drive for dominance, this insatiable hunger for power, is also its greatest weakness. The chaos gods are in a sense prisoners of their own natures, beings of pure, undiluted emotion who can never truly find peace or stability. They are locked in an endless war, not just against the forces of order, but against each other. And this constant, unrelenting conflict threatens to tear them apart from the inside. Khorne, for example, is a god of violence and rage, a being who demands constant bloodshed and endless war. He cannot rest, cannot compromise, cannot back down from a fight, for to do so would be to deny his very nature. But this same bloodlust, this drive to dominate through sheer physical force, makes him blind to the subtler forms of power wielded by his rivals. He is a blunt instrument in a realm of cunning manipulators, a roaring beast surrounded by creatures who thrive on deception and misdirection. It's not hard to imagine a scenario where Khorne, in his endless hunger for battle, exhausts his own strength, turning on his own followers in a blind, all-consuming rage, shattering his own empire in a storm of blood and fury. Then there's Tzeentch, the changer of ways, the master of schemes and secrets, a being whose very existence is defined by constant change and endless manipulation. Tzeentch thrives on chaos in its purest form, feeding on the lies, betrayals, and broken promises that ripple through the immaterium like cracks in a shattered mirror. But this same drive for constant change, this endless hunger for new plots and new schemes, could one day prove to be his undoing. For a being of such twisted, convoluted ambition, there is no final victory, no ultimate triumph, only an endless cycle of schemes within schemes, plots within plots, until he finds himself trapped in a web of his own making, unable to escape the ever-tightening coils of his own designs. Nurgle, too, is a creature of contradictions, a being who embodies both decay and renewal, the slow, inevitable rot that claims all things in time. He is a god of despair, but also of stubborn, unyielding endurance, a being who clings to life even as he spreads death and corruption. But this same attachment to the cycle of decay, this refusal to let go, makes him vulnerable in his own way. For all his power, Nurgle is, in a sense, a god of stagnation, a being who clings to what he has rather than reaching for something new. And in a realm as chaotic and ever-changing as the Warp, this stubbornness could one day prove fatal. And then there's Slaanesh, the youngest and perhaps most tragic of the Chaos Gods, a being of pure, unbridled desire, a creature who craves sensation in all its forms, from the heights of ecstasy to the depths of agony. Slaanesh is a god who can never truly be satisfied, whose hunger for new experiences is as endless as it is self-destructive. It's not hard to imagine a scenario where Slaanesh, in his endless quest for pleasure, exhausts his own strength, consuming his followers in a desperate, all-consuming orgy of sensation that ultimately leaves him a hollow, empty shell. A god who has burned through his own essence in his pursuit of ever greater heights of excess. What makes this idea truly terrifying is that it's not just a possibility, but a fundamental part of the nature of chaos itself. The gods of the Warp are beings of pure contradiction, creatures of unrestrained emotion and unbridled power, and it is this very nature that drives them to destruction. They are, in a sense, doomed from the start, trapped in a never-ending cycle of violence and betrayal that can only end in their own ruin. And perhaps, in the end, this is the true nature of chaos, a force that devours itself, a fire that consumes everything in its path, even its own creators. For if the Chaos Gods are truly the embodiments of the darkest, most destructive aspects of the sentient mind, then perhaps their ultimate fate is to burn themselves out, to destroy themselves in a final, all-consuming blaze of madness and fury, leaving nothing behind but the shattered echoes of a broken, dying universe. When we think about potential threats to the Chaos Gods, it's easy to imagine that they have no true rivals, that they stand alone as the uncontested masters of the Immaterium. But that might be a dangerously simplistic view. The truth is, there are forces in the galaxy, both within and beyond the Warp, that could one day challenge the dominance of the four great powers. Some of these forces are ancient, others are born from the minds of mortals, and some are so strange and alien that even the gods themselves might struggle to comprehend them. One of the most obvious threats comes from the Necrons and their ancient masters, the Khitan. While the Khitan themselves are physical beings, creatures of pure starfire and cosmic power, their creations, the Necrons, have a unique advantage over the forces of chaos. They are completely soulless, their minds reduced to little more than cold, unfeeling machines, utterly immune to the psychic influence of the Warp. Unlike the living races, who are constantly feeding the Immaterium with their emotions and thoughts, the Necrons exist entirely outside the psychic ecosystem that sustains the Chaos Gods. They are, in a sense, an anti-warp force, a race whose very existence is an affront to the power of chaos. Some fans have even suggested that the Khitan themselves might pose a direct threat to the Chaos Gods, despite their current weakened state. These beings once fed on the energies of entire stars, consuming the life force of entire galaxies before being shattered and enslaved by their own creations. If they ever managed to break free from their Necron overlords, if they ever regained even a fraction of their former power, it's not hard to imagine them turning their wrath against the Immaterium itself, seeking revenge against the gods who have fed on the souls of their mortal victims for millennia. Then there are the entropic forces, strange, primal currents of destruction and decay that seem to exist outside the normal flow of the warp. These forces are not true gods, nor are they simple demons. They are more like living embodiments of the natural forces of decay and entropy, creatures that thrive on the slow, inevitable breakdown of all things. They are said to be older than the Chaos Gods themselves, beings of pure, unfiltered destruction who see even the twisted, nightmarish creations of the warp as little more than temporary distractions in the grand cosmic dance of death. Some even speculate that these entropic forces might be the true architects of the universe's final end, creatures that will one day rise up to devour the gods themselves, reducing the Immaterium to a lifeless, empty husk, a graveyard of shattered dreams and broken souls. It's a grim, unsettling thought, but one that fits all too well with the dark, apocalyptic tone of the Warhammer universe. And then, of course, there are the humans themselves, the fragile, short-lived creatures whose emotions fuel the very existence of the Chaos Gods. While it might seem laughable to suggest that a species as weak and divided as humanity could pose a real threat to the gods of the warp, there is a certain logic to it. After all, the Chaos Gods draw their power from the psychic echoes of mortal minds, from the fear, hatred, desire, and ambition of countless billions of souls. But what if those souls were to one day turn against them? What if humanity, in a final act of defiance, were to somehow sever the psychic connection that binds them to the Immaterium, cutting off the very source of the gods' power? Some have even suggested the Emperor of Mankind himself, in his long, silent vigil atop the Golden Throne, might one day rise to challenge the gods of chaos directly, casting down their twisted, immortal forms in a final, apocalyptic battle for the soul of the galaxy. It's a far-fetched idea, perhaps, but one that has gained a surprising amount of traction among certain corners of the Warhammer fandom. After all, the Emperor has already defied the gods once, casting down Horus, their chosen champion, and shattering their plans to dominate the material universe. Who's to say he couldn't do it again, given the right circumstances? And finally, there are the strange, nameless things that lurk in the darkest corners of the Immaterium, the forgotten echoes of older, stranger gods, and the half-formed spirits of emotions that never quite found a place in the twisted hierarchies of the warp. These creatures, if they exist, could pose a very real threat to the Chaos Gods, for they are not bound by the same rules, not driven by the same primal urges, and not beholden to the same twisted logic that defines the current rulers of the Immaterium. It's a terrifying thought, one that forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about the nature of chaos and the beings that dwell within it. For if the gods themselves are not invincible, if they can be challenged, overthrown, or even destroyed, then the true nature of the warp might be far stranger, far darker, and far more terrifying than even the most twisted of mortal minds could ever imagine. The future of chaos is one of the great mysteries of the Warhammer universe, a dark, twisted question that has haunted fans for decades. After all, the Chaos Gods are not just powerful entities, they are fundamental forces of the universe, beings of pure emotion and raw psychic energy, embodiments of the darkest, most primal aspects of sentient thought. They have existed for millions of years, feeding on the fears, desires, and ambitions of countless souls, and they have shaped the galaxy in ways that few mortals can fully comprehend. But even gods, it seems, are not immune to the passage of time. And many fans have speculated that the reign of the Chaos Gods might one day come to an end. One of the most popular theories among fans is that the Chaos Gods are, in a sense, victims of their own nature, beings trapped in an endless cycle of violence and betrayal that can only end in their own destruction. It's a grim, unsettling thought, but one that fits all too well with the dark, apocalyptic tone of the Warhammer universe. After all, the Chaos Gods are beings of pure contradiction, creatures who draw their power from the raw, unfiltered emotions of living beings, but who are themselves utterly incapable of change or growth. They are, in a sense, frozen in time, locked into their own twisted patterns of behavior, unable to escape the cycles of destruction and renewal that define their existence. Some fans have even speculated that this endless cycle of violence and betrayal might one day lead to the complete collapse of the Chaos Gods, a final, apocalyptic war that tears the Immaterium apart and leaves nothing but the shattered echoes of a broken, dying universe. This idea, sometimes known as the Final Discord, is a chilling one, a vision of a future where the gods themselves turn on each other in a final, all-consuming blaze of madness and fury, destroying not just themselves, but the very fabric of the warp itself. Others, however, take a more optimistic view, suggesting that the Chaos Gods might one day evolve, that they might somehow transcend their own natures and become something greater, something more complex and more terrifying than anything we can currently imagine. This idea, sometimes known as the Great Ascendancy, is based on the notion that the Chaos Gods, like all living beings, are capable of change and growth, that they might one day break free from the cycles of violence and betrayal that define their existence and become true, transcendent beings of pure, undiluted chaos. Some fans even speculate that this great ascendancy might already be happening, that the Chaos Gods are slowly but surely evolving into something new, something far more dangerous and far more unpredictable than the beings we know today. They point to the strange, unpredictable behavior of the Chaos Gods in recent years, to the sudden, inexplicable shifts in their power and influence, as evidence that something is changing in the Immaterium, that the gods are preparing for a new, more terrifying phase of their existence. And then, there are those who believe that the Chaos Gods are not the ultimate rulers of the warp, that they are merely the latest in a long line of powerful entities that have risen and fallen within the Immaterium, that they will one day be cast down by newer, stranger powers that have yet to emerge. This idea, sometimes known as the rise of the Forgotten, is based on the notion that the warp is a place of infinite potential, a realm where even the mightiest gods can one day be overthrown and replaced by something new, something stranger and far more terrifying than anything we have yet imagined. And finally, there are those who believe that the Chaos Gods are not merely beings of pure emotion and raw psychic energy, but that they are, in fact, the embryonic forms of something far greater, the first, stumbling steps of a new kind of consciousness that will one day transcend the limitations of the warp and become something truly godlike, beings of pure, unfiltered chaos who can reshape reality itself with a single thought. It's a wild, unsettling idea, but one that fits all too well with the dark, twisted logic of the Warhammer universe. After all, if the Chaos Gods are truly the embodiments of the darkest, most destructive aspects of the sentient mind, then perhaps their ultimate fate is to become something even more terrible, to transcend the limitations of the warp itself and become true, transcendent beings of pure, undiluted chaos, creatures whose very thoughts can reshape the universe in their own twisted image. Whatever the future holds for the Chaos Gods, one thing is certain: their story is far from over. The Immaterium is a place of infinite potential, a realm where even the mightiest beings can fall, and where the strangest, most unpredictable forces can rise to take their place. And perhaps in the end, it is this potential for change, this endless, unpredictable cycle of destruction and renewal, that makes the Chaos Gods so terrifying and so fascinating in the first place. Chaos is a paradox, a force of pure, unrestrained energy that embodies both the greatest potential for creation and the deepest, most terrifying depths of destruction. It is the ultimate contradiction, a realm where the impossible becomes real, where the darkest thoughts and wildest dreams of sentient beings take on physical form, and where the only true constant is change itself. It is a place of boundless potential and unimaginable horror, a realm where even the mightiest gods can fall and where the strangest, most unpredictable forces can rise to take their place. What makes chaos truly terrifying is not just its power, but its unpredictability. The Chaos Gods may seem invincible, but they are prisoners of their own nature, beings driven by the very emotions that sustain them, trapped in an endless cycle of violence, betrayal, and decay. They are creatures of pure, unfiltered emotion, beings of primal, undiluted rage, despair, ambition, and desire, and it is this very nature that makes them so dangerous and so vulnerable at the same time. We have seen how the gods of chaos, for all their power, are not immune to the forces of change, how they are constantly at war, not just with each other, but with the very nature of the immaterium itself. We have explored the forgotten entities and primal forces that may still linger in the darkest corners of the warp, waiting for their moment to rise again. We have considered the possibility that the chaos gods might one day destroy themselves in a final, apocalyptic war, consuming their own strength in an orgy of blood and madness that leaves the immaterium a broken, dying husk. But perhaps the most terrifying thought of all is that the chaos gods, for all their power, are not the ultimate rulers of the immaterium. They are, in a sense, only the latest in a long line of powerful entities that have risen and fallen within the warp, beings who have clawed their way to the top of the psychic food chain, only to find themselves trapped in an endless cycle of violence and betrayal, forever at war with the very forces that gave them life. And perhaps, in the end, this is the true nature of chaos, a force that devours itself, a fire that consumes everything in its path, even its own creators. It is a realm where even the mightiest beings are never truly safe, where even the gods themselves must constantly struggle to maintain their power and avoid the ever-present threat of destruction. It is a place of endless change, a realm where the only true constant is the certainty of betrayal and the inevitability of decay. So as we look to the future, as we ponder the fate of the chaos gods and the twisted, nightmarish realm they call home, it's worth remembering that in the end, even the darkest, most terrifying forces in the universe are not immune to the forces of change. They are, in a sense, prisoners of their own nature, beings of pure, unfiltered emotion who can never truly find peace or stability, and who are forever at war not just with each other, but with the very nature of the immaterium itself. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the twisted, terrifying world of Warhammer 40k, be sure to subscribe for more explorations of the dark corners of the galaxy. There are countless more mysteries to uncover, countless more horrors to explore, and countless more stories to tell. So join us as we continue our journey through the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, and where even the mightiest gods can one day fall.